Hello and welcome to Pluribus Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. There isn't much anything else for me to report on this end of things, so let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be starting off in our good old buddies, the UK. This has been interesting. For those who don't know, the United Kingdom held elections not that long ago, May 6th. This was supposed to be the elections that were supposed to show Keir Starmer was a stark contrast to Jeremy Corbyn, and that, New Labour's winning again. But the thing is, they did not actually do so hot. They lost quite a few people. They lost 8 councilorships and 327 councillors. And in the by-election that they actually held, they lost. And it's a big loss, considering the fact that it is actually a Labour-held seat that they lost. And not just a Labour seat. This is basically the equivalent of if, basically if the most Republican area in the country lost to a Democrat. Oh, this is perfect. I just remembered the good comparison. It's basically when Roy Moore lost to Doug Jones. It's such a, whoa, how did this happen? People are legitimately what? And everybody was, the thing is, everybody was blaming Corbyn. Corbyn's the reason we lost all this. But Keir Starmer didn't do so hot either. And one thing that many people point out is, when Corbyn was leader, they won those seats. Very interesting. It's even gotten to the point where John Trickett, a Corbyn ally, basically said we shouldn't throw the idea of challenging Keir Starmer off the table. It is very possible that we could challenge Keir Starmer's leadership. And many people are even saying Keir Starmer isn't going to even make it to the next election. And it's really dumb. They went through all this trouble to get rid of Corbyn. And now they're just on the fence of they're probably going to get a new Corbyn pretty soon. I don't know what's going to happen next. Will the GPU actually get a chance to go? Or maybe not. We don't know. We'll find out. Okay, so the next story is coming from the NRA. The judge dismisses NRA's bankruptcy petition, allowing New York Attorney General lawsuit to move forward. Okay, so remember when I said a little bit ago that the NRA was filing for bankruptcy? Well, you see, the NRA has basically been trying to declare bankruptcy in order for them to, not get any, they're getting a huge lawsuit from the state of New York and their attorney general, and that's the only reason that they've really wanted this thing to happen. That's the only reason they filed for bankruptcy. But basically, New York's attorney general basically was yeah, I see what you're trying to do. No. The NRA will apparently still have some bankruptcy protections, but for the most part, they're still around. And the NRA, tweeted, a thing where they're we'll still keep up the good fight, and it's stupid fucking morons. Okay, so the next story is basically a repeat of a story that happened a little bit ago, but on a completely different angle. Remember back a little bit ago when Trump said that he was going to start the Patriot Party? Well, basically, the neocons decided to do that too. 100 Republican officials tell the Republican Party, hey, get your crap together or we're going to bounce. And this all comes from a huge debacle surrounding Liz Cheney, of all people. Basically, for those who don't know, I'm pretty sure you know at this point, but Liz Cheney was one of the Republicans who voted against, not voted against, but voted for impeaching Donald Trump over the January 6th insurrection. And basically, that has made the Republican Party so mad that they have replaced her with a new Trump lapdog, pretty much. They got someone who is super pro-Trump to be her replacement. Many people have been yo, what? And a lot of Republicans within the party basically said, look, clean up your act or we're jumping ship and forming a new party. And a lot of people on the, like, lib sphere were like, oh no, please do not do that. Oh no. And I made a tweet that literally tried to explain this perfectly. It's like, guys. The QAnoners don't like the neocons. The neocons don't like the QAnoners. The socialists don't like the neoliberals. And the neoliberals don't like the socialists. How about this? How about we all just get out of those broken relationships and go independent from each other? I think that makes everybody happy, yes? And that's why other countries that have better electoral systems are way better than us, because these groups of people don't have to pretend to like each other. In other countries, all four of these groups, they will basically have their own parties and their own unique processes and their own wings. And that's the truth. In Canada, they have a left, a right, and a center party. Meanwhile, in America, it's like the far right and the right have to fight for control of one party, and the center right to left have to fight for control of the other party. And it's like, why don't we all have our own parties? Why don't we have something like a proportional representation system, or a ranked choice voting system, or anything else that basically indicates that we could actually have multiple parties do multiple different things? There are countries where it's legitimately like one party's a socialist party and the other one's a communist party. There are countries where there are multiple communist parties who are completely opposed to each other, and both of them have representation in the, like, parliament or whatever. This is a thing that happens in other countries because their electoral systems are not that broken. Now, of course, it's not gonna happen in our country as of yet, but it's like the fact that everybody keeps crying every 3 minutes, like, oh, we need to form a new party, like, that shows that the momentum is there, but the problem is everybody is too cowardice to actually do it. It's like so freaking dumb. Now let's move on to the next story. Xinjiang. Oh boy. The tankies in the audience are not gonna happy about this. Xinjiang births plummeted after crackdown on the Uyghurs, says report. Birth rates in Xinjiang fell by almost half in 2 years after the Chinese government implemented policies to reduce the number of babies born to Uyghur and other Muslim minority families, new research has claimed. The figures show unprecedented declines, which were more extreme than any other global region at the time in the 71 years of UN fertility data collection, including during the genocides in Rwanda, Cambodia, according to the authors of the report by the Australian Strategy Policy Institute. The data adds to mounting evidence that the coercive fertility policies in Xinjiang, including first-person accounts of forced sterilization or birth control, and leaked policing data on the internment of women for violating family planning regulations. They were among Chinese government policies believed and designed to forcibly assimilate the Uyghur and other Muslim populations. In April, Human Rights Watch determined that the Chinese government was committing crimes against humanity, but said that the extent of coercive birth control and sexual violence, which is alarming, needed more investigation. Now, if you're one of those tankies in the audience that is still going to sit there and claim, but it's not happening, you're an idiot. Like, you're an idiot. You are. You legitimately are. And the thing is, like, all these people, like, I hate tankies. They legitimately are, they claim like they're so much better than fascists when they literally are not. Like, literally, when their genocider does a genocide, they will turn the other way. This is the exact same thing. You're literally the left-wing alternative of Nazis. Not even that. The same people that will sit there and go, free Palestine and apartheid, will also go like, oh yeah, but what's happening to the Uyghurs in China? That's not a thing. The same people that will sit there all day long talking about like, oh, the United States and all of their problems, they'll go, oh, I mean, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? There's nothing going on in China. It is happening. If you don't know this, you're stupid. I've had to talk to many different people on, like, fucking Twitter that they're legitimately like, no, it's just not happening. And then I show them literally everything And they'll just go, nope, no, 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 la, 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 la. I base everything that I talk about on data and facts. You do not. You will say a fact to their face, and they will look at you and laugh. That's why I made the funny Twitter video of communist guy going, haha, you silly fool, falling for American propaganda yet again, and then tagged it, oh, when a tanky sees you cite literal facts and data, because literally every single piece of information that I give them is American propaganda. Cite Al Jazeera, American propaganda. Cite the BBC, American propaganda. Cite eyewitness testimony, American propaganda. Cite Democracy Now!, American propaganda. Cite literal people, like, and they will always go like, oh, what Zens? I don't give a shit about Aaron's or Andrew Zen's. Like, I'll literally just say, oh yeah, China's literally committing a genocide, and they'll go, Andrew Zen's. It's like, I did not mention Andrew Zen's once, man. My evidence is the eyewitness testimonies, or the people who escaped this, or the people who did all this. And, like, my eyes, that's literally what they'll say to you, basically. Like, who are you gonna believe? Me or your lying eyes? China is committing a cultural genocide. That is a fact. That is a literal fact. Just because you don't want to see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Well, all you live in your fantasy land where everybody's secretly a Marxist, we're going to talk in the real world about real issues. Especially considering the arguments that I give, it's like so dumb. It's literally like all of these people talking on many, many, many different videos, talking in Chinese, talking in Arabic, talking in English, talking in, like, recording videos with like 5 views with like 240p on a cell phone, like from all across the world in many different languages. Like, oh, they're all just psyops, apparently. They don't understand the real world. They don't understand how much manpower it would actually take to fake a genocide. Especially if, like, with the fact that, like, somebody would have definitely been like, interesting. Why are we reporting on this? We should leak it. And then they're like, oh, but no, nobody leaks. There's never been any leak by the CIA ever. Except for insert the millions of leaks here. It's so dumb. Just so ridiculous. I'll say it before and I'll say it again. What's happening in Xinjiang is a genocide, and I happen to believe that genocide is bad. It's not my fault that you think genocide is good just because the person who's doing it has a hammer and sickle emoji. Speaking of genocides, let's talk about Israel again. Because if there's one thing China and Israel have in common, is killing Muslims. But first, we're actually going to talk about something different in the Israel situation. We're going to talk about America and their response. Because America, believe it or not, has been very interesting in regards to their stances on Israel. One big thing many people have been trying to talk about is what the basically there was a thing where a bunch of individuals basically formed blocks where they would talk about the issues. There was a right-wing block and there was a left-wing block. The right-wing block was basically a bunch of right-wingers who were basically trying to talk about, like, oh, we stand with Israel and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a progressive block, which tried to talk about the Palestinian issue very clearly and very, like, hard pressed on the ground, talking about the fact that they're pro-Palestinian. The progressive block are the ones that we actually give a shit about, so I'm going to give them praise. Mark Buchan, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Betty McClellan, Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cory Bush, Jan Schakowsky, Jesus Chuy Garcia, Andre Carson, and Joaquin Castro basically all gave speeches talking about the Palestinian issue from the stance of, oh, we like the Palestinians. The other ones were talking about, like, oh, the bad Hamas rockets go boom, when they don't acknowledge why the Hamas rockets flew into the area to begin with. Like, I mean, yes, we can acknowledge Hamas rockets shooting people bad, but we can also say, yeah, but the reason why they shot the rockets was also bad. You know, they only shot the rockets when Palestinians were being killed by Israelis, but who cares? I mean, come on, who cares about brown people, am I right? I mean, they're brown people, am I right? They're not Jewish, they're brown people. It's basically their only response, like, oh yeah, brown people. Well, I mean, they can't say that because they're Democrats who are saying it. The Republicans can say it, but the Democrats can't say it. But I mean, that's what they would say. I mean, there were progressives back in the day that would literally say, like, who cares about the Palestinians and their little mini-terrorists? That's what progressives would say. Well, I mean, granted, the progressive I'm talking about is Anthony Weiner, who's a pedophile, but, I mean, that guy's cringe all the way. But outside of Congress, there's also been a debate in the presidential administration. Because here's the thing. Apparently, UN actually tried to get a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, but the Biden administration has reportedly blocked the ceasefire in the United Nations because the Biden administration wants to take credit for making the situation end, which is definitely like, what the, man, what? And the Biden administration has not necessarily indicated that he would be super pro-Palestinian in regards to his response, because he's been really praising Netanyahu and all the stuff that's going on at the particular moment. Like, we stand with Israel against Hamas, and it, like, let's be real about one thing. I didn't put it together 2 and 2 until now, but it's pretty obvious at this point because, I mean, I should have seen it before, but it's pretty obvious at this point. The only reason this is happening is because Netanyahu was so close to not getting out of power. Like, he was so close to getting kicked out of the prime ministership that he did this. And it happened, it was a much similar thing that happened in the last election. When Netanyahu was close to losing, Donald Trump announced a plan that would annex certain areas of, Netanyahu announced that plan, and then Trump, approved of that plan, and then, he said, oh, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Like, he was the first president to declare that, and then everybody was like, oh! And it was like that, because here's what happened. The change bloc of Israel has actually collapsed. Yamina and Bennett have announced that they will not be joining a coalition with Yair Lapid, and basically, we're back to square one, and Netanyahu remains prime minister. He has literally gone to the point where it's just like, oh my. And he is still in power. They're gonna hold another election, and it's just like, oh, come on. Just pick somebody. Come on. Like, at this point, I think people are just gonna tell, people of opposition parties are just gonna say, screw it, just vote for that guy. Vote for fucking Yair Lapid so we can get this situation under control. But basically, this is just, I don't know, man. This is just ridiculous. Let's move on to the main topic, because that's slightly less ridiculous. As of the day that this podcast comes out, it will be Joe Biden's 120th day since taking office. And as you can guess, there has been a lot of controversy surrounding what is happening in the Biden administration. Some people look at the Biden administration a lot more favorably than others. So basically, what I'm going to do in this episode is basically go over some of the things that Joe Biden has done in his 120 days, and basically give you a I don't know what you'd call it, like a performance test, basically a pre-test. Basically give you what do I think of it thus far? Because again, there's a lot of people who have a lot of different views. Now this is where things are going to get a little more interesting, because I think here's what's the major thing. We got 2 major divides with the left right now. The left that thinks that Joe Biden is doing a good job, or a quote-unquote good job, and the left that thinks that Joe Biden has done an absolutely terrible job. And I think that one of the major differences between these two groups is the fact of who they voted for. You see, a lot of the people who have said that Joe Biden is doing a absolutely terrible job are also coincidentally the lefties that said they would not vote for Joe Biden under any circumstance. Meanwhile, the lefties that view Biden more favorably are also coincidentally the lefties that were huge advocates for voting for Joe Biden and voted for him themselves. And I think that it is actually that reasoning that is sort of putting these guys on edge. You see, if you hate Joe Biden and you're like, I hate Joe Biden 100%, he's terrible, yucky, gross, you're not necessarily going to say that he's actually doing a pretty good job at this point. Because if he's doing a pretty good job, then hypothetically, you would be considered like, oh, so you voting against Joe Biden was actually a bad idea, and that he actually did a pretty good job. And the ones who did vote for Joe Biden, if he ended up turning like worse than he turned out, they would probably still say he's doing better than expected, because they have to justify them voting for Joe Biden. And I have to acknowledge my bias as well, because I did not vote for Joe Biden as well. I was like, I can't sign off on the bad things that he's going to do, so I can't vote for him. Even though I am in a swing state, I couldn't vote for him. So basically, we're going to go over some of the things that he did, and basically see what are my thoughts. I may or may not make this a thoughts on in the podcasts, but I mean, we'll see. Okay, so first, we're going to talk about this. His healthcare, his domestic affairs, particularly in regards to healthcare. First, Biden apparently, rescinded work requirements for Medicaid recipients. And the administration opened a special enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, as well as extended the normal enrollment period, citing COVID-19. Speaking of which, that's of course, his main thing. The Biden administration, that's his, that was his issue. You know, we are the COVID, his plan was very simple. We need to stop COVID and get COVID under control, especially given the fact that COVID was basically the only thing that got him in the White House. If COVID didn't happen, I guarantee you Trump probably would have taken the presidency. So, how has he been doing on COVID? Well, on his first day as president, he implemented a federal mask mandate requiring the use of masks and social distancing in all federal buildings, federal lands, and federal employees and contractors, also signing an executive order reversing the withdrawal of the U.S. from the WHO, making Dr. Anthony Fauci the delegation to the WHO, because Fauci was the big guy, he's the COVID man. And on January 21st, he released a 200-page document titled The National Strategy for COVID-19 Response and Pandemic Preparedness, and invoked the Defense Production Act to speed up vaccination processes and ensure the availability of glass vials, syringes, and any form of vaccine supplies on the federal level. Biden also established a White House COVID-19 response team, basically giving the White House a specific office to deal with this specific pandemic. But I assume he's also going to try and use that to basically become a new pandemic response team. On January 21st, he signed 10 executive orders pertaining to COVID-19 in order to meet his vaccination goals of 100 million shots in his first 100 days. Biden signed an executive order increasing the needing of supplies. He signed an order that directed FEMA to offer full reimbursements to states for the cost of using their own National Guard personnel and emergency supplies, such as personal protective equipment in schools. January 24th, Biden reinstated a travel ban imposed by President Trump on Brazil, UK, Ireland, South Africa, and 26 other European countries to try and contain the virus. He implemented a mask mandate on all forms of transportation, pretty much. CDC had requested that to be enacted under Trump, but Trump said no. In mid-March, he dismissed a request by the European Union to export unused COVID-19 vaccines from AstraZeneca out of the U.S., even though the manufacturer endorsed it and vowed to resupply the doses. The rationale for the decision, which contributed to the low European vaccination rates, was that the U.S. had to be oversupplied and overprepared, according to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Whereas the U.S. exported no vaccines, the European Union exported 77 million doses to the worldwide from December 2020 to March 2021, and eventually reversed course and gave certain vaccines to Mexico, Canada, and Japan by the end of March. Now, that is one thing that is definitely a weird thing. Biden, he refused for a little bit to basically, he said, no, we're not going to export certain vaccines. even though the manufacturer said, yeah, do that. The rationale, of course, will probably be like, oh, he has to protect his nation before protecting other people's nations. But it's definitely like, but it goes against like a lot of things that he was saying during the pandemic. Like, oh, this is a worldwide pandemic. We need to fix this. And now he's like, hey, no, that's my vaccine, mine. And of course, one of the biggest things in regards to COVID was his recent thing regarding the supporting of waiving the patent protections on existing COVID-19 vaccines so that other nations can basically try and make their own cheaper versions. But around the same time, French President Emmanuel Macron called on the U.S. to put an end to export bans on not only the vaccines, but also the vaccine ingredients, which prevent production, because the U.S. apparently still has like control over who make like they have control over all the ingredients in the COVID-19 like vaccine. So yes, while it is good like he's trying to get other nations to have the vaccine, and I mean now, it's still weird like he's still like the one in charge of making the vaccines like at all. Another big thing in regards to COVID was the American Rescue Plan, which of course had its own slight bit of controversy. Basically, it was the divide of the century. 2000 versus 1400. For those who don't know or don't remember, because it seems it actually does seem like a while ago that this was a controversy. Basically, when Biden was running for like president, during like the last couple of weeks and with the Georgia runoffs, he was basically saying, hey, vote for us three and you'll get $2,000. However, there was a problem. You see, Trump had already issued $600 checks to a bunch of American citizens. So then, Biden then stated, like when he got elected, that he was going to push for $1,400 checks. And everyone was like, wait, well you said $2,000. And he's like, well, yeah, you got $600 already. And, you know, we got like $1,400 to give you the rest. And I was basically like, hey, whoa, what the heck? What the heck, man? Like, that was a bit of a controversial sentiment because some people were like running under the idea we thought we were gonna get like 2,000 with that 600 that we already got, because I think like he was still campaigning on this while the $600 were released. I think he started the like issue before any checks were released, but the fact that he kept talking about this after the $600 checks were already being mailed made people think, oh, we're going to get 2,000 more, which I'm not sure if that's necessarily him going back on a campaign promise, much like he did with that like vaccine waiver thing before he had to be pressured into not doing that. And now that we're talking about money, we can transition to some of Joe Biden's economic plans. First, he signed an executive order to remove Schedule F, overturning a number of Trump's policies that limited collective bargaining of federal unions, and he signed an executive order that promoted a $15 minimum wage for federal employees and repeals 3 of Trump's executive orders, which made the employee discipline process stricter and restricted union representatives' access to office spaces. Basically, one of the things that Biden was trying to run on, you know, being a more union-based guy, like, oh, I'm a union man, I understand your union sensibilities. And he's also been trying to, like, push Congress to, like, do certain other labor and economic kind of things. Like, you know, he was saying, like, you need to give me the PRO Act so I can put these collective bargaining practices, you know, nationwide. And then he also, like, it was in the State of the Union address where he was like, and while you're sending things in my office, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. So, like, he's trying to indicate that he's at least somewhat in favor of certain of these policies. Another thing, he's been trying to push Congress to try and raise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. Not the 31% that he was promised, like he was before, but, you know, it's still like an indication that he's trying to push things into a better direction. And he also did that thing that Trump said he was going to do, but didn't. That whole Buy American, like, domestic manufacturing executive order. Basically saying, oh, the government is going to buy American, rather than like, oh, we say buy American, but what we actually mean is buy Chinese, which is basically what the Trump administration did. He's also sort of tried to stay within Trump's like somewhat protectionist trade policies as well. Basically keeping like Chinese, like keeping the tariffs on China, and basically saying like, we're trying to do this in order to like protect workers and protect like human rights, which is also what led them to suspend their trade agreements with Myanmar after Myanmar had their coup. Now, of course, many people will raise the issue like, oh, what about Israel? What about Saudi Arabia? Which, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do all this, then you're not necessarily doing the best. He's trying to produce a lot of other plans. You know, I think he's trying to like do the Warren thing where it's like, I got a plan for that. The America Jobs Plan, which will aim to spend massive amounts of money on the infrastructure on the order of $20 trillion, trying to create 18 million jobs, and, you know, and also trying to increase American income by $4,800 by the end of his first term. You know, he's also got the American Families Plan, which is basically an $18 trillion proposal to significantly increase federal spending areas in relating to childcare, paid leave, pre-K, community college, and healthcare. And it's sort of like the Build Back Better agenda. Like, it's part of the Build Back Better agenda, you know, American Jobs Plan, the American Rescue Plan, etc., etc. Because one of the big things that Biden is trying to do is basically, like, it's the thing that everybody kept trying to say about him. He's the new FDR. Like, oh, because the thing about FDR, many people don't realize, is that FDR wasn't a socialist. And in fact, you could even argue he wasn't necessarily even a social democrat. He was like a liberal. He was a liberal, pretty much. He was a progressive capitalist. So Biden is trying to like somewhat appeal to that crowd. One big thing he's also trying to do, to be a stark contrast to Trump, is, of course, trying to tackle the environment. He rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. He canceled the construction on the Keystone XL pipeline. He issued a 60-day ban on oil and gas leases and permits from federal lands. This isn't one thing that technically necessarily is a big thing, but he appointed Deb Haaland to be the, like, Secretary of the Interior. You know, he appointed a Native American woman to basically be in charge of, like, the environment and all of our other things. So he's been trying, like, to push for, like, better environmental concerns. Again, like, not as good as you. That's the big thing. Like, spoilers, but that's probably what I'm going to say at the end of this. Like, basically the big thing about Biden is that he's doing the return to normalcy, but that's it. Like, he's going back to an area where we are comfortable and familiar with, but not to the point where we've gone so drastic. But anyways, now let's talk about a big other issue. Immigration. That was one of the big things that was, like, I mean, again, that was one of the big things. That was a big thing about the Trump administration. Immigration. And this was one of the big pieces of contention in regards to the Biden administration. Because, given a lot of things, you know, certain things have been happening. There was a surge in immigrants coming to the United States, both due to seasonal things and, you know, the fact that a Democratic president is in charge, and the fact that that president is not Donald Trump, who is historically, like, not that good with immigrants. Like, that was one of the many reasons. And in response, there was a big problem with Biden and his, you know, basically, he sort of, in a degree, continued those policies. Of course, like, that's one of the big things I always emphasize. Not to the same degree, but also he did technically continue them. He did separate people from their families, but he did it in a different way. This is one of the big things. Basically, here's what it is. He would not separate children from their parents, but he would separate, like, for Donald Trump, he would separate children from their parents, children from their brothers, children from their grandparents, children from any guardian that they came with, whatever. They would separate them, the end, deport the parents, never see them again. But the Biden administration has been handling it differently. Basically, here's what would happen. A child and his, like, young brother, who's, like, 5, and the older brother is, like, 10, or I should age it up, like, 13, they show up and they request, like, hey, Biden, can we live in America? And then Biden's like, wait, hold on. How do I know for sure that you're that kid's brother? So they would separate them for like a little bit, put one kid in one detention facility and put the other kid in another detention facility, and basically go like, hey, we'll figure out what's going on. And then after like a couple of months of verification, Biden will go, all right, verified, you're all good here, and then put them back together. That's still screwed up, 100%. That is still screwed up. It will still mentally screw with that kid for the rest of his life. But there is an end to the story. There is a somewhat happy ending to the story. And when I say somewhat happy ending, of course, that means both of those kids end up together in an immigration facility. Still bad, yes, still bad, but not as bad as Trump did it. The rest of his stuff in regards to domestic policy has mostly been virtue signaling to a degree. Except for like the ending the ban on transgender individuals serving in the military. You know, like, think, for example, he's like pushing to push Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. Yeah, that's cool, but that's virtue signaling pretty much. So now it's time to move on to the other issue that is with Biden, his foreign policy, because that's how like he decides it. They divide it in domestic affairs and foreign affairs. So first, in regards to his foreign policy, yeah, it's basically been, you know, somewhat similar to the Trump administration. I say somewhat similar, but not entirely the same. You know, for example, he's been a bit harsher to, like, countries like Russia, you know, speaking about Alex Navalny and saying, like, hey, and we support Alex Navalny. And, you know, they've been, but, like, in regards to, like, say, for example, China. China is, of course, the big enemy of Donald Trump, is, of course, going to be the big enemy of Joe Biden, because China is our economic and basically they're our number one rival at this point in time. So he's, of course, remained somewhat hostile, like I said before. He's remained in regards to continue our, like, big tariffs in regards to other things, but he has remained somewhat hawkish on certain things. Like on February 25th, he did a retaliatory airstrike on buildings in Syria, and a lot of progressives in Congress were like, yo, what the F, man? What'd you do that for? It was like, sorry, man. But I would probably say his biggest things in regards to foreign policy would be, like, two major things. One in regards to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, basically halting all arms sales to them in regards to Jamal Khashoggi, and announcing that the U.S. would not, like he announced that the United States would be ending its support for the UN, like, not for the UN, would be ending its support for the Saudi-led bombing in Yemen. However, he hasn't really necessarily revealed his, like, the full extent of his plans, so that's a bit up in the air. But the last thing that is his big thing is what he said in regards to Afghanistan. Remember, that was the big thing when he said that he was going to be pulling all of the troops out of Afghanistan on September 11th, 2021. Which, similar to what I said previously, you know, you have to wait and see. You don't necessarily know for 100% certainty that it's going to be the case. Like, I mean, we need the details, and I'm pretty sure there are details that you could probably argue that some people would not necessarily agree with. Like, for example, one thing a lot of, like lefties in some degrees have been saying were like, oh, we shouldn't pull out yet because blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure that that's why he's holding the thing, like why he's doing it on September 11th, for many reasons. One is, of course, so he can have, like, the posture and, like, the thing where he's like, on this day, this many years ago, we came into Afghanistan, sent our little boys to go die in a war that blah, 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 blah. And on this day, we're gonna bring the boys home. Like, it's too big of a virtue signal for him to, like, pass up. But also, I think that the reason why he's pulling out on that date is because he wants to, like, negotiate a plan to pull out by that date. And if he doesn't agree, and if they don't get a plan on that date, then they're probably going to, like, not do that anymore. We have to wait and see what happens. Basically find out if he'll be pulling out or not. And that will probably be the biggest thing that'll make me say a big, more definitive thing. Like I said previously, basically what the Biden administration has been thus far is basically him trying to be a antithesis to Trump, but not too much of an antithesis that there's this huge, massive change on the other side of the aisle, but he's being just enough of a change that people are like, phew, what a breath of fresh air. Basically being like a lot of his things. Like he's pulling out on this state instead of this state in regards to Afghanistan because he's like, oh, smart foreign policy. Like, and he's like, oh, Trump spent all day long talking about this big thing. And in fact, why don't we actually do this thing? Like, there's a lot of things that he's doing that's basically trying to be the antithesis of Trump, but a safe antithesis of Trump. And that's pretty much all he is at this particular moment in time. We still have a couple of years to see if he can actually be more than just the slightly better than Trump. Like, if I don't know, like, I'm not going to put him on, like, the presidential tier list yet, because, again, we have to wait to see what happens. All I can say is that definitively he's higher than Trump. That's all I can definitively say. He's better than Trump, yes, obviously. But at this point, it's like, I don't know, like, I was gonna say, like, put it on a tier list, but I was like, no, but then I mean, I have to put Trump on a higher area on the tier list. But, like, basically, it's like Trump is an F, Biden is like a C or C. I mean, that depends on if that tier list is an E. If the tier list is an E, he'd probably be in D. But, like, you get my point. He's good, he's fine, like, but that's just it, just fine. Like, the way I can describe him is, like, Trump is like that restaurant you really hate, but then Biden is like that restaurant that, basically, like, Bernie, Trump, and Biden, it's like this. Bernie is that restaurant that you always want to eat, you're always ready to go to, no matter what, you always want to go there. Trump is that restaurant that you're just like, you hate it no matter what. There are some people in your family that like it, but for some reason, you really just don't like it, and you hate it 100%. And Biden is that restaurant that you're like, I don't really hate it, but, I mean, like, if you got it for me, I'd eat it, but I'm not going to ask for it either, so you really only get it when you're, like, rushing or something. That's essentially it. That's essentially what Biden is. And yeah, that's basically his rating after 120 days. Can I say I regret my decision not voting for Joe Biden? No. That'd be dumb. I don't regret my decision. I made my decision because, yeah, I mean, that's it. This is essentially all we're getting, pretty much. He's willing to prove me wrong. The squad and the rest of the people are willing to push him left and prove me wrong. But this is essentially all we're going to get during the administration. And, I don't know, that might lead to a worse Trump down the line because this is all we're going to get. Or maybe this is going to provide enough stability that the left has a fighting chance. I don't know. We'll never know. We don't know yet. I mean, that's the thing. We don't know. We don't know yet, and we'll find out pretty soon. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you need some more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check my articles on the Independent Political Report.